Welcome to Modern Day Economics, where we discuss economic issues and events that affect our families and communities. Today, we're really going to ask ourselves the question: are we in a recession? So, as most of you may know, the Fed came out with the level of GDP for the second quarter, and it was negative 0.9%. So, why is this important? Well, traditionally speaking, recession is defined as two consecutive quarters of negative GDP. And that is, in fact, the case. And these numbers prove that the traditional definition of recession is met. It is very much met. It has always been considered that a recession is defined as two consecutive quarters of negative GDP. And this is exactly what's happened in accordance with the Bureau of Economic Analysis. So, according to the traditional sense, yes. Now, there is some voices that say that there's a push to change the definition of recession. I don't know if there will be push for that to happen or not, but at least in the traditional sense, yes. The answer is yes. In the traditional definition of the word recession, we are in fact now in a recession. Some may say, well, you know what, the unemployment numbers aren't bad. Um, there's not it's not that big of a deal. And we have to remember, I mean, we just came out of the 2020 dip, March of 2020, and really that happened a lot more quickly maybe than most recessions do historically. Most recessions are far more gradual. 2020 was very fast. It was very much kind of like a knee-jerk reaction kind of feel, whereas most recessions are a little bit more gradual. And this is all in a context of inflation that is far higher than the Federal Reserve target of 2%. We were at 9.1% GDP, and the Federal Reserve also expects to continue raising rates, which further contracts the economy, typically speaking. So, not only do we meet the technical definition of recession, we have the expectation of behavior on the Federal Reserve's end to further contract the economy. So, the goal, of course, of that behavior, which is to increase rates, is to fight inflation, which makes sense. That's one of their mandates, of course. But we also have to keep in mind that the side effect of that is that it contracts the economy, and the economy is already contracted for two consecutive quarters. So, will that cause a third quarter of negative GDP? How much will the economy necessarily contract? I guess we will have to see. For those of you loyal listeners that have been listening to the other episodes, you've seen that the home sales were down in the month of June by 8% on a monthly basis. June's typically a month where homes are supposed to go up, at least historically speaking, because a lot of families are looking to relocate their kids to a different school district potentially, or to a different area that may be more desirable prior to the school year being initiated. In addition to that, we saw the manufacturing index go down, less orders, less overall activity. So, a lot of things to look out for. We have to ask ourselves: is this necessarily an economy that is as strong as the media is making us think, or that we may think, at least at first glance? Well, we don't make recommendations here or provide any sort of professional advice. We just give you the facts and let you decide. But um, the fact is that, at least according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the economy has been contracting for 6 months now, and there is projections of additional interest rate hikes that typically do further contract the economy. Now, as we've discussed in some other episodes as well, will the Fed really be able to tackle inflation? Well, um, historically speaking, you have to raise rates higher than the rate of inflation in order to do so. And if inflation is 9.1% and rates are drastically lower than that, well, it may take a little bit of time, some say, to achieve that goal. So, how much more will they be willing to raise rates, given the level of federal debt as well? All the portion that is financed with treasury bills and shorter term securities at some point may need to be refinanced, or there may be a need for new debt. And that debt will carry a much higher debt service cost. So that's another thing to consider as well. So how far will they continue to raise rates? And maybe the effect of contracting of the economy will also put some downward pressure on inflation. Some out there say, just given the fact that there'll be a decrease in demand, but there's also the current that focus more on, as Milton Friedman said once, which is that inflation is always and in every case a monetary phenomenon, which is based on the increase of the money supply. Really, if we look at the example of the European Union, this is one that really kind of goes to show and is used a lot by those that are train of thought of Milton Friedman, which is the case of Switzerland, right, where the Swiss franc has not suffered the same level of increase in money supply that the euro has, at least since the beginning of the COVID pandemic. And inflation last year was, I believe, in the range, don't quote me on this number, but in the range of 2%. And inflation in the Eurozone, which did suffer the increase in the money supply, was drastically higher. I don't remember the exact number, but it was certainly higher than 8%. It was significantly higher, and the both of those economies suffered the same supply chain issues. I know that some of the leaders in the ECB were blaming all of this on supply chain for a while there. Well, we do have an example of two economies that had the same supply chain issues. One had far higher level of increase in the money supply, and the other one did not. And the one that did increase the money supply did, in fact, suffer, at least in the official numbers, a higher degree of inflation. So I guess we will have to see what happens as we move forward in these uncertain times, moving into recession in the technical sense of the word. As we mentioned before, our current situation does meet the traditional definition of recession. So most of you that may be thinking, well, what the heck do I do, right? If we do go into recession, if the economy may contract even further based on the increase in interest rates, what do I do? What can I do, right? And I'm not going to recommend any specific investment or any magic pill or any get rich quick scheme. But what I can tell you is that it may be worthwhile to network, because you are only as strong as your network as an individual. A man or woman is only as strong as the team that surrounds them. And if we do get in a situation where there are layoffs, which you never know what can happen, it's always better to have connections and have contacts. And maybe you do not get laid off, but maybe you're in a situation where you're not currently happy with your current situation, and you have the opportunity to network and get out of that bad situation as well. And maybe it just helps you with your peace of mind, and you don't decide to take any action steps or make any career movements necessarily. But if you haven't yet, go ahead and listen to my episode on networking. Definitely something to consider during a pandemic. It's accessible to everybody. You don't have to be a multimillionaire. You don't have to be a accredited investor to network. You can be Joe Schmo, working a minimum wage job, or even unemployed, and you can still network. So definitely take a look at that if you haven't already, as we may be in a recession currently as we speak today. Thank you for listening to Modern Day Economics. Stay tuned for more current economic events that affect our families and communities.